I think we can start. I can kick off with some.
Did you want to give a brief introduction, Herman, or did you want me to just go ahead?
Just let me give a brief introduction.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for everybody that signed up already. We have quite a number of participants already signed up. We have also some people that is watching us on YouTube this morning. So from UNSC side, for the first meeting, we ask that you mute your mics and so that we don't get that background noise when somebody is speaking. You can indicate in the chat or raise your hand if you wish to speak, and help if you tell us who you are when you take the floor the first time. So we would like to encourage you to ask questions in the chat so that it saves time. Myself and Catherine will follow that and make sure that we bring your question to the presenters. This event is also live streamed on YouTube, and the recording of it will be available afterwards. We will also post all the presentations online. As soon as that happens. As you know, this is a side event of the Statistical Commission that's taking place next week. Unfortunately, also an online event from Monday till Wednesday, and then also next Friday. So we invite you also to join us in the meeting because it's an online event. You can do that through the web TV. Catherine, with that, I would like to give over to you. It seems all the presenters are here, so good to go. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Herman, and good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm honored to have the privilege of chairing today's webinar, which, as Herman emphasized, is going to focus on the well-being aspects of the work of the Intersecretariat Working Group on National Accounts, and in particular, the task team on well-being and sustainability. And we're going to talk about a statistical measurement framework beyond GDP within the context of the System of National Accounts revision. I first became involved with this work in my former role as Director of National Accounts at Statistics Canada. And at that time, I was a member of the Advisory Expert Group on National Accounts, and I've continued in this role in my transition to the World Bank, where I now represent with other international organizations on the Intersecretariat Working Group on National Accounts. So while today's event will focus really on the well-being aspects of the work of the task team on well-being and sustainability, the work also includes a number of proposals to better account for the environment in standard macroeconomic measures from the System of National Accounts. So Jorrit, in his overview presentation, will provide a sense of what these proposals are all about. But they will not be and while they're very significant, they will not be the focus of our event today. So in today's webinar, the first two sessions will look at broader considerations around well-being and sustainability and explore the extent to which the statistical framework for the System of National Accounts can be broadened to address them. Now, this is not about a whole-scale redefinition of standard macroeconomic measures, which might risk to compromise their use for existing key analyses, but rather it's about how the statistical framework can be expanded to address key issues of societal interest and to integrate their measurement into the System of National Accounts in a coherent and comparable manner. So today's webinar will start with Jorrit Zwijnenberg, my co-collaborator at the OECD, who I've had the pleasure to collaborate on this work for some time now. And Jorrit will give a broad overview of the broader S&A framework for well-being and sustainability and talk about the work of the task team. It will be followed by a presentation by Eric Strassner from the United States Bureau of Economic Analysis, which will describe efforts in the United States to broaden the analysis in this direction. Then after these first two presentations, we'll take questions, and I'd ask you to put them in the chat, or you can also raise your hand and we'll allow opportunities to take the floor. So we'll have about 10 minutes for questions. And then following this question period, we will then have 3 presentations which will focus on different aspects of the work from the perspective of different countries who have done work in relevant areas that are under consideration for the System of National Accounts revision. The first will be by Bjorn Jarvis from the Australia Bureau of Statistics. And I'd like to thank Bjorn for joining us at what must be a very late hour in the middle of the night in Australia, who will focus on labor accounts, which is a coherent set of estimates that expand the labor element and underpin the national accounts measures. And this is of course under consideration for the S&A revision. The second will be from Francisco Guillen of Mexico, who will discuss efforts in Mexico on the unpaid work of households. And the third will be from my colleague at the World Bank, Jose Pablo Valdez Martinez, who will talk about distributional measures that have been developed for Costa Rica in a collaborative effort for the World Bank. So each presenter will have about 15 minutes. So I'd ask you to try make your best efforts to respect that time. And then, as I mentioned, after the first 2 presentations, we'll take questions from the floor, either via the chat or you can raise your hand. So without further ado, I would like to pass it over to the first speaker, Jorrit Svanenberg, to talk about the broader S&A framework for well-being and sustainability. So Jorrit, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Just to check, you can see the screen?
Yeah, it looks great.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So my name is Jorrit Svanenberg. I'm the head of sectoral accounts at the OECD. And as OECD, we provide the secretariat for the well-being and sustainability work. So in this presentation, I would like to share with you the work we have been doing on developing a broader framework to capture well-being and sustainability within the System of National Accounts. And I prepared this presentation together with Catherine, who's one of the chairs of the task team. So in this presentation, I will first like to give some background on the work in the context of the update of the System of National Accounts. Then provide an overview of the status of the various guidance notes that we are drafting within the task team, highlight the main recommendations of the various guidance notes, and then say some words on the development of the broader framework to bring all of this information together. So to start with the S&A revision process. So as all of you might be aware, the macroeconomic statistical standards are regularly updated to reflect changes in the economy to bring them up to speed with the current state of the economy. So this relates to the System of National Accounts, the Balance of Payments Manual, government finance statistics, monetary financial statistics, etc. And these updates can usually be categorized into 3 main categories. So you have the conceptual updates, so a change in what we are measuring in the System of Accounts, methodological updates, so changes in how we measure specific elements, and also presentational updates, so how we present the relevant information. And we are currently in the process of updating the statistical standards, and we try to do this in a coordinated way to make sure that we arrive at a coherent set of manuals across the S&A, the BPM, GFS, and other related manuals. So we are currently tackling a lot of issues that have been affecting the economy over the past decade to see whether updates are needed in the statistical standards. So here you have an overview of the specific topics. Some are specific to the area of balance of payments. Some are specific to the area of the national accounts. And we have a lot of combined issues like globalization, financial issues, intellectual property products, etc., etc. And one of the main topics in these updates concerns the issue of well-being and sustainability. So why is there a need to have a look at well-being and sustainability in the context of the update of the SNA? So when you look at the overarching macroeconomic measurement framework, the boundaries of the SNA define what we call the economy. And a lot of macroeconomic indicators are dependent on these specific boundaries. And they really impact decision-making and shaping the narrative on what is counted as progress. And in this context, you can see that while it is not designed for this purpose, the headline indicator, GDP, which everyone will be familiar with, is often misused to present societal progress. However, this is not really reflecting the well-being of households to the detailed extent, and it also doesn't capture sustainability issues. So what we've seen over the past years is a proliferation of alternatives to modify or expand the measures that you can find in the SNA to address issues around well-being, sustainability, and negative externalities of economic activity. And a lot of the times this is in satellite accounts or extended tables. And we think it's quite relevant because of the increased importance of the discussions on well-being and sustainability to bring this in. So looking at the topic of well-being and sustainability, it's quite clear that this is not just a single indicator, but that this is a multidimensional phenomena. It affects different topics that relate to well-being of households and the sustainability. And this also means that we have to look at a broader framework to analyze the various interlinkages, the trade-offs, and the win-wins between all of those dimensions. So we have to make sure that we describe the relevant dimensions and also bring them together in a consistent framework. And this is particularly important when you look at the new economic reality with increasing globalization, digitalization, in which production aggregates like GDP are less indicative of the well-being of households. We see all kinds of new production arrangements, the shifting of intellectual property products, which makes it more difficult to directly link GDP and societal progress. Furthermore, we see an increasing polarization of income, consumption, and wealth within the household sector. So there is also a need for more information on how this is distributed across various household groups. So these are just a couple of elements why we think there is a need for more emphasis on well-being and sustainability in the new SNA. So we have been discussing the best way to approach this. And one approach would be to elaborate the overarching framework with linkages to microdata. So go at a very detailed level and bring in well-being and sustainability elements. And whereas this would be desirable, it's probably not feasible, particularly in the short run. So we think we have to go for a more pragmatic approach. And in this case, we would like to put more emphasis on the compilation of extended modules. And here we can draw upon the body of guidance that is already available. So a lot of the work has already been done over the past 1 or 2 decades, developing various satellite accounts, tackling issues in the area of well-being and sustainability. And we can use that for building the broader framework. And we also think that we have to be flexible in the frequency of compilation. It might be quite challenging to compile some of these results. So we have to see if this can be done on an annual basis or a multi-annual basis. And it's also important that we look for integrating non-monetary measures in addition to monetary information, because non-monetary information sometimes provides relevant insights in aspects of well-being and sustainability. So we have 5 areas under consideration. So the distribution of household income, consumption, saving, and wealth, the unpaid household activities, the aspect of labor, education, and human capital, the aspect of health and social conditions, and also the element of environmental economic accounting and how this affects the issue of well-being and sustainability. And a 6th work stream in this sense is the combination of all this information in a broader framework. So just to provide a quick overview of the status of the guidance, because the task team has already been doing a lot of work. So a couple of guidance notes have already gone out for global consultation, and they are currently being finalized on the basis of the takeaways from the global consultation. And this concerns the distributional work, the unpaid household work, labor, education, human capital, and the ownership and depletion of natural resources. And then a couple of guidance notes will be upcoming in the coming months. So please have an eye out for that. So this concerns health and social conditions, treatment of emission permits, accounting for biological resources, accounting for renewable energy, the valuation of natural resources, and the recording of provisions. And then towards the end of the year, we also aim to have the guidance note out on the broader framework. Then shedding some light on the main recommendations for each of these work streams. So for the distributional results, it's mainly increased granularity, breaking down the household sector into multiple household groups, and also slightly adapted alternative concepts and classifications, amongst others, to facilitate the link between the micro and the macro results. On the unpaid household activities, we have extended alternative concepts as a complement to traditional measures like GDP to also include the value of unpaid household activities. So an additional measure there, and also new granularity in time units and demographic information. On the health and social conditions, it's providing more emphasis on the relevance of healthcare sector, the financing. We also rethink some existing classifications and try to bring in more detail to provide more insight in how health is working out in the economy. And on the labor, education, and human capital, we propose new labor accounts in physical units, new details on education and training, and also extended alternative human capital assets as experimental estimates. Then on the environmental economic accounting, there are quite a few guidance notes drafted at this point in time. So on ownership and depletion of natural resources, there is the proposal to have more emphasis on depletion adjusted net measures, and also looking at the economic ownership issue of natural assets. Biological resources, it's rethinking the SNA production boundary and the asset boundary, for example, in relation to cultivated assets. So here you can think of stock of fish or forests. How do we account for the production or the growth in these stocks? Treatment of emission permits. So here it's considered to treat the atmosphere as an asset. The accounting for renewable energy resources. So how do we derive the correct economic value of these specific resources? In this vein, there is also discussion on the valuation of natural resources more in general. So how do you apply a net present value approach to these specific mineral and energy resources, and what kind of issues do you need to overcome? The recording of provisions, so how do they affect the value of the resource assets? So there is a proposal for a supplementary table on provisions, and also the issue of recording of losses, so how do they affect the value of natural resources? And this is currently being worked on. So then finally, focusing on the development of the broader framework. So all of these guidance notes, touching upon the various elements of well-being and sustainability, they have various implications. So what you see is that some of them propose more granular product breakdowns. Some will provide more granular industry breakdowns, asset breakdowns, sector breakdowns for some of them. There is also the supplementary non-monetary information. Sometimes there is the proposal for further breakdowns into social demographic groups to see how they are affected by the various elements. In some occasions, the extension of the production boundary, extension of the asset boundary, and in some occasions, the creation of new tables. So quite a lot of repercussions forthcoming from all the guidance notes in this area. And then we also see that there are quite a few linkages between the various topics. So for example, healthcare and education may be provided in the form of unpaid household activities. So it might be relevant in the work on the unpaid household activities to explicitly account for this. Labor accounts and distributional information would benefit from the extension to also include unpaid household activities. So which household groups does it concern? How much benefit do they derive from that? How much time is spent on that? Environmental economic issues, they may affect healthcare, and then changes in health might affect human capital. So a lot of linkages that we probably would like to show in a broader framework. And what you can also see is that all the groups aim to have breakdowns by socio-demographic groups. So this is also something we need to align across the various proposals. So the main question for the broader framework is, how are we going to combine all of this information? So the main challenges here is how to align the various proposals. So various proposals from the groups. So we need to make sure that they are aligned on the specific topic level. So for example, if they propose socio-demographic breakdowns, we have to make sure that they are proposing similar breakdowns so that this can be combined. How to combine the various proposals in core tables. We can come up with a proposal to just combine all of this information in one overarching table, but that would be a monologue that would be way too demanding. So this is not considered feasible. So we realize that choices have to be made what breakdowns to include in the core tables and what information we may want to cover in supplementary tables. And then the question is also how to present this information. Do we want to create new indicators on the basis of well-being and sustainability, combining traditional economic indicators with some of the elements as tackled in the various guidance notes? So this is also something to look at. So the next steps in this regard is we are assessing the new classification breakdowns proposed by the various guidance notes. We assess the links between the 5 subdomains, and we are drafting proposals on how to combine this information. And as more information, as more guidance notes become available, we have more information how the broader framework is going to shape up. And at the same time, we have to work on the terminology, the languages. So should we talk about core accounts, central framework, extended alternative concepts, supplementary tables? So we really have to see where specific information is going to be covered and how this is going to be presented and to be referred to in that sense. We have already started this work, but as I mentioned earlier on in the presentation, some of the guidance notes are still being drafted at this point in time, and we have to wait for all the information to come in. So we hope to advance in this work in the next couple of months, and then probably have a first proposal for what the broader framework will look like in the second half of 2022. Just to mention, if you are interested in the guidance notes that have been drafted, here is a link to the webpage of the UN, where you can find all the global consultations, not only for well-being and sustainability, but also for a lot of the other areas. So if you click on the Towards the 2025 SNA, you might find all the relevant information. And if you have specific questions, please feel free to send me a message or to contact some of the authors of the relevant guidance notes. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jorrit, and very good timing. I think Jorrit's presentation has really highlighted not only the need for this work within the context of a broadened SNA framework, but also the breadth of the task that has been undertaken to incorporate all these elements and the challenges and complexity that face us in trying to put them all together, both from a conceptual and methodological standpoint in terms of rigor, but also in terms of formulating a set of guidance that is operationally feasible and can be implemented in a broad range of countries. With broad applicability across a range of institutional frameworks. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to the next speaker, Eric Strassner, who will talk to us about efforts in the US to look at these well-being measures in the context of the growth agenda at the United States Bureau of Economic Analysis. So Eric, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Catherine. Catherine, I'd just like to confirm that you can see the screen okay?
Yeah, it looks great, Eric. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. So thanks very much, Catherine. And I'd also like to thank the Intersecretariat Working Group on National Accounts and the Task Team on Sustainability and Wellbeing for the invitation to participate today. The motivation for this work at BEA is to use our data resources and statistical capacity to better inform the discussion on economic well-being. Simon Kuznets in the 1930s, with the creation of gross domestic product, maintained that the aggregate totals were not sufficient to measure the economic well-being of society. Indeed, that rings true today. We have embarked on what we are calling our GDP and Beyond initiative to better track and highlight economic activity that is included in GDP, but not necessarily visible in headline statistics. In addition, developing more granular distributional data and new products are part of our ongoing strategy to provide insights into the performance of the US economy. As part of the first phase of this initiative, BEA has repackaged statistics from its core accounts with data from statistical agency partners in ways that provide new perspectives on economic well-being and on the distribution and long-term growth of the economy. These include measures like GDP per capita, inflation and employment trends, distributional statistics such as real GDP growth by industry, real personal income per capita by state, and the distribution of personal income across households. Additionally, we are also looking at long-term growth indicators, including trade balances, US budget deficits over time, and trends in US business cycles. Here, while the growth and size of GDP are oft-cited measures of the nation's economic health, they provide limited information on economic well-being. A large and growing GDP may simply reflect a large and growing population. GDP per capita standardizes for population and is often used as a proxy for a nation's standard of living. Real inflation-adjusted GDP per capita for the US has grown more slowly than real GDP, increasing 2.3% per year on average between 1953 and 1973, compared with 3.8% for real GDP. Over the last business cycle between 2007 and 2019, growth slowed, with real GDP per capita increasing at 1% per year and real GDP growing at 1.7% per year. One driver of the changing distribution of income is the movement in the share of labor income relative to capital income. After reaching 63% in 1970, labor's share of income has generally declined, and in 2020 stood at 59.6%. Capital share of income increased from 37% in 1970 to 40.4% in 2020. And so I hope between these first two charts, which are part of our visual essays on BEA's website, these are some of the indicators you can look at to think about how BEA is taking on board economic well-being and growth. Now what I'll do is I'll turn to some of our dedicated research and new initiatives that we consider to be part of the theme of Beyond GDP, namely distributions of income, healthcare spending by medical condition, small business and size class statistics across industries, and labor market data by demographic group. Okay, distributions of income by earnings and social benefits help us understand and examine the relationship between changes in the household distribution of income and growth in income. Looking at the period 2001 compared to 2019, compensation in dark blue has fallen as a share of income for all quintiles, while transfer payments through social benefits in the light blue have risen. Income for the top quintiles, shown in the rightmost bars, is driven much more by assets, shown in gold, and proprietor's income, shown in red. There has been little change in income shares over the period 2000 through 2019. The top 1% captures about 10% of total income. The top 10%, shown here with the gray dashes and the lightest shades of blue, captures close to 60% of disposable personal income through this period. Here, we are looking at the household equivalized Gini of personal income and disposable personal income, which have similar trends over the 2000 through 2019 period. The Gini coefficient is a well-known inequality statistic with higher numbers indicating more inequality. Naturally, inequality falls once taxes are taken into account, as shown in the light blue disposable personal income series. Overall, the inequality of personal income as measured by the Gini is largely unchanged since 2000, despite some volatility during the Great Recession. During the Great Recession, falling inequality reflected an increase in transfer payments and a decrease on returns to assets. One thing I'll note is that our results for the top 1 and the top 5% are similar to prominent research trends that have been found in research by Piketty, Saez, and Zuckman, among others. But wait, in many ways, there's more on distributions, and that is to take the BEA work to the state level to provide more granular information on the distribution of personal income. Building off the national effort, we have experimental estimates through 2018 for the 50 states of the US and the District of Columbia. The forthcoming work shows different percentiles of the distribution, as well as results controlling for state variation in prices using our regional price parities program. There are significant variations across states as measured by the Gini coefficient. While bottom quintile shares of personal income are similarly low across states, there is much more regional variation in the top quintiles. The dark shades of blue in this chart of the map of the US show the higher Gini coefficients, which are largely concentrated in large states across the coast, but also within certain regions. The lowest inequality is concentrated in the lighter blue in the Great Lakes region, including states like Minnesota, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Okay, turning to healthcare, the aim is to show spending by treatment of disease, which may provide a more meaningful view of US healthcare expenditures. The motivation for a healthcare satellite account stems at least in part because of how much health expenditures are as a share of gross domestic product, which was about 18% of GDP in 2019. Now, in this chart, this is more than just consumer spending on health. This chart also aggregates expenditures on structures like hospitals and other health clinics, pharmaceutical spending, as well as related medical equipment. In the healthcare satellite account, we redefine health expenditures into more meaningful units, where output is the treatment of a condition, for example, diabetes, not individual goods and services that are consumed as part of healthcare expenditures, for example, prescription drugs or doctor's office visits. We use data from the federal statistical system through what is the Medical Expenditure Panel Survey, or MEPS, which is sponsored by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, along with administrative data from large claims databases for private insurance and Medicare insurance. And what we find through this work is that when we use the MEPS only account, that there are a set of medical condition price indexes that are quite volatile and noisy due to the small sample sizes for many conditions. And so this is where we use blended data, the use of big data through the incorporation of claims data, millions of records on private insurance and Medicare insurance. And what this leads to is less volatile and more informative price indexes for medical conditions. I should note that the use of private and administrative data for the healthcare account is just one of several areas where blended data is being leveraged to produce more informative statistics, and particularly so on our Beyond GDP agenda. Through the blended account, we were able to produce 261 detailed condition level estimates. The largest share of US spending outside of trying to understand a set of ill-defined symptoms is spending for circulatory, musculoskeletal, and nervous system conditions. Moving on to small business, the goal is to understand business size across industries and over time, and how different firms contribute to growth. Most US businesses are small. They create jobs and employ millions of Americans, yet there is no comprehensive nor consistent measure of economic activity on small businesses. So we seek to answer questions like how small businesses contribute to the economy, what industries are dominated by small businesses, and how wages compare across the size class distribution. Using both employment and revenue data, we find that small businesses represent about 25 to 30% of total wages and salaries in economic activity, and that this share has not meaningfully changed over time, at least in thinking about the years 2012 and 2017. In these statistics, we break out small businesses to even further disaggregation by size, and some of these finer disaggregations have come from user feedback. That has also included looking at firms by asset size and by legal form, which is part of our current work. When we drill into industry level estimates, we show that small businesses dominate in some industries. So here, all blue shaded areas are small businesses or businesses that are less than 100 employees. Industries where small firms are more dominant include agriculture, forestry and fishing, real estate rental and leasing, and other services, which include personal care services. Okay, so moving to the final topic for today is one that is an emerging area on our agenda and really becoming a higher priority through time, and that is to look at labor market data by demographic characteristics to understand how economic outcomes relate to growth. BEA is pursuing integrating demographic labor market data into the national accounts. We just heard from Bjorn about how this is a priority for the update to the SNA as well. The basic motivation for this is that labor compensation is the largest component of income for most Americans, and thus understanding differences in labor market outcomes across demographic groups is important. There is a slew of labor data already publicly available, like that from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And these data often include demographic breakdowns. Therefore, BEA's value added here is presenting labor market data that is tied and integrated with the national accounts. For example, by having labor data by demographic group that is integrated with published labor compensation in the gross domestic and personal income accounts. And we can trace how growth in aggregate labor income accrues to different demographic groups through those accounts. To provide an example, we can use data like this to see differences in labor market outcomes by gender, both within and across industries. The height of each column represents each component's share in value added, and the dollar values are average hourly wages in the construction and social assistance sectors. We can see several things here. One, construction is more capital intensive, and we can think about the interplay between capital and labor market outcomes. That is not apparent with just labor data. Two, males are a large share of the workforce in construction, and many are without a college degree. Three, the share of female workers is much larger in the social assistance industry, with the share of workers with a college degree slightly higher than the non-college share within the industry. And four, in general, women earn lower than men in these two sectors, but we can see that in construction, women without a BEA, a bachelor's degree that is, are basically on par with men who do not have a bachelor's degree in terms of average hourly earnings. The big picture point is that we can start to use this data to think about and analyze labor market outcomes and how these differ by demographic group within the data of the national accounts. So let me close by saying that there's a lot to do on the Beyond GDP agenda. I hope that I've left you with a flavor of where the BEA is headed and where the opportunities reside. Beyond GDP will continue to be a high priority by making advancements in each of the topics I discussed today, while our future work looks to extend beyond to provide a better understanding of well-being, equity, and inequality, as well as sustainability. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Eric. I think this presentation really demonstrates, from the point of view of the United States, that we can marry many of these socioeconomic, if you want, factors with the headline growth number, the GDP. And Herman corrected me that your presentation was really about well-being and growth. And so how do we bring these estimates together? And the U.S. has clearly gone in a number of directions which provide insights into this headline figure, and also demonstrate that the system of national accounts is not just about the GDP, but there are many other elements that can be analyzed within that. And in addition, expansions into these different areas such as distributions, healthcare, small business, and labor. Some of these we'll be hearing about in the second half of the program. So we're going to hear a little bit more about distributions from Jose Pablo in the second half, and also about labor statistics from the ABS. But right now, I'd like to invite participants to enter questions in the chat for, or comments, if you like, in the chat for the first two presenters. We can take about 10 minutes for this before we transition to the second half of the program. You can also raise your hand, and I'll do my best to see whose hand is raised. It's a little bit difficult for me to identify in the WebEx format here, but I'll do my best. So please, I'd like to encourage you to enter your questions if you have some. And while I'm waiting for the participants to enter questions, maybe I'll just ask a question to Eric to get things going here. So I wonder, Eric, when the Bureau of Economic Analysis, a very well-respected institute in the United States, where I am currently living, working for the World Bank, has transitioned to this new sort of approach to disseminating and delving into this these new areas in addition to the headline GDP. I wonder how this has been received by the policy community and by users in general in terms of these measures. And I wonder if you might comment on that a little bit.
Catherine, thanks so much for this question and for your remarks about the work that BEA is doing in the area of well-being and sustainability. So this work has been well received. It's been understood for some time to be much needed, a much needed complementary set of data from BEA and other U.S. agencies to supplement and complement what we do for our core macroeconomic statistics. And so in the current administration in particular, there's a lot of emphasis around equity and inequality, around understanding how different demographic groups share in growth, how they are impacted by macro statistics. So there's a lot of interest in the demographic information as well as the distributional information, and increasingly on the environmental economics agenda, where BEA traditionally has not done very much work, but is a growing part of our future plans. I hope that helps address what you're thinking about, Catherine.
Thanks very much, Eric. That's great. I see a question has come in from Peter Van de Ven to you in particular, Eric. Do you have plans to make estimates for unpaid household activities in the United States?
Peter, thanks for your question. We do. So we have a household production satellite account, and that is one of the themes I did not cover today. I probably would have covered it if we had a bit more time. There's so many topics that are important to this well-being agenda, and certainly understanding household activities and making estimates for those unpaid household activities is one of those areas. We've had work in this area for quite some time at BEA. We do routine updates in this area, maybe not necessarily every year, but every couple of years. And in fact, just in the February, what we call the Survey of Current Business, which is our monthly journal, we have the latest update on our household production account. So I would flag that, and always happy to talk more about this with you, Peter.
Thanks a lot, Eric. Since there doesn't seem to be too many questions coming in the chat, I'm going to take the liberty of asking Jorrit to elaborate a little bit on some of the work of the Wellbeing and Sustainability Task Team. I know the answers, but for the benefit of the participants, perhaps there's been a great deal of effort that has gone into developing the guidance to date, and we really encourage many of you, as Jorrit has indicated, to participate in the global consultations and provide additional feedback on the guidance notes through that. But I wonder, Jorrit, if you could talk, we didn't have time to address this in the presentation, but if you could talk a little bit about the various task teams that have contributed to this work and what the process was that led to the development of the guidance so far.
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, as I presented, there are quite a lot of area groups tackling or focusing on the specific topics, and these groups consist of experts around the world, both from statistical offices, academia, international organizations, and they have been looking at drafting guidance notes to see what specific recommendations are needed in the specific areas, leveraging off existing work and to see how this can be combined. And this is brought together in the guidance notes. And as I mentioned, indeed, some of them have already been put forward, first to the advisory expert group on national accounts, and then launched for global consultation. And in the global consultation, it is indeed receiving the feedback from countries around the world. We really appreciate a lot of the feedback that we are receiving, and we hope to receive both inputs from compilers but also from users to see if the specific recommendations make sense, if they address their specific concerns. And after the global consultation, we look upon the results and see if there are needs to further update the guidance. And in some occasions, I think also relevant to mention that if some of the guidance notes include really new recommendations that we don't know whether they are going to be feasible, there is also the possibility of experimentation and testing. So we definitely want to make sure that if we come up with recommendations, that they are also feasible for compilers to come up with the relevant estimates. So in the coming period, there is also going to be experimentation and testing in which we are trying to involve specific countries to have a look at coming up with first experimental estimates. And I think, as I mentioned, some of the guidance notes have already gone out. Currently, the main pending ones are on environmental economic accounting. There we also closely liaise with the SIA community to make sure that we leverage off all of the information that has already been done in that area, and to see what of those elements we can bring into the system of national accounts. And this sometimes leads to very interesting discussions, and it sometimes takes a bit to figure out where to draw the line, what to include, what to exclude. Hopefully by the end of March or in the course of April, we will have another 5-6 guidance notes available on the website. Hopefully this answers your question. Oh, you're muted, Catherine.
Sorry, here I go again. Yes, thank you very much. So just to emphasize that this effort to date to develop this guidance has really involved teams of experts from all over the world in all of these various statistical domains. So it's been quite an elaborate effort that has engaged, folks from NSOs, experts from academia, and also international organizations that have been hosting the various components of the revision, not just well-being and sustainability, but also in some other areas such as digitalization and globalization. I see a couple of other questions have come in the chat. First from Paul Schreier to Eric. Eric, are the new deflators for healthcare already part of the national income and product accounts in the US? So maybe I'll let Eric answer that one before I go on to the next question.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. No, they are not yet part of the core national income and product accounts. They are, this is the plan, is to bring them in as part of the core statistics. We feel that we have a bit more work to do on quality adjustment for these price indexes, and that's really the focus of that effort right now. What we're continuing to do is put out regular updates of these disease-based price deflators But there is some more work to do on quality adjustment before we feel like it's appropriate to actually bring them into the core accounts, which is the plan though. So thanks for your question.
Thanks, Eric. Very complex subject, price measurement in the US accounts in terms of quality adjusted for the healthcare. And I know in Canada, my prior experience, we were trying to develop output measures that accounted for all of these things because healthcare is public. So it was a different exercise, but it took a similar form. A question for Jorrit from Sanjeev. Jorrit, could you elaborate the strategy on the broader framework and the challenges of the joins, like shared assets as inputs? To accounting for consumption and fixed capital. Jorrit, do you want to try and tackle that one?
I will give it a go. Yeah, thanks, Sanjeev, for the question. I think for the broader framework, the main issue is that we have the core framework, we have some of the extended accounts, more detailed accounts, and we would like to benefit as much as possible to bring this information together. So it would be really useful if you can combine information on health with human capital, with environmental economic issues, have distributions, but we probably have to make choices at what level of detail we would like to do so. So in the end, if you would combine all classification proposals, if you would combine all requests from all the guidance notes, it's going to be way too much. So for us, the challenge in the broader framework is to make the right decisions in at what level of detail do we want to combine information and present information, and where is the main user interest in this. I think also a specific challenge is going to be some of this information will only be available once every 2 or 3 years. Some information is available on an annual or even a quarterly basis. Which guidance can we provide for countries to try to combine as much as possible? And if you need to combine information, what specific elements are you going to tackle? And I think on the joins, it's mainly looking at, for example, if there is a proposal for the distributional work to highlight social demographic groups, 25 to 35, 35 to 45. We have to make sure that all the other groups are also going to target those specific breakdowns instead of coming up with a group of 20 to 30, 30 to 40, so that it doesn't match. And this is a simple example, but I think there are quite a few of those examples when we look at the proposals made by the various groups. I see your point indeed on the joints. I think shared assets indeed is an issue. I think for the broader framework, it's more to make sure that we describe all the relevant assets, to see if we need to make specific breakdowns that might facilitate some of the analysis. So if there is a joint use of an asset, do we require a specific further breakdown? And then it needs to be assessed how this trickles down into consumption of fixed capital estimates. But I think there the issue is probably broader than the well-being and sustainability side. I think here you might also look at indeed digitalization issues, where you might have specific tools that might be used for multiple purposes, and where it might be very tricky which element of the consumption of fixed capital you might allocate to what specific product. So I think this is probably a joint methodological issue that we may need to assess during the experimentation and testing to see if this will provide a challenge, and in that case, how we can best solve it. So hopefully this answers your question, but otherwise, happy to further discuss bilaterally. Thanks.
Jorrit, I see that one final question has come in from Ivo. Ivo Havinga is asking, Jorrit, as we articulate the broader framework for macroeconomic accounts, should we also articulate what is Common Core with specific extensions in the SNA, the SIA, the BPM, the GFSM, etc.? So there's another good one for you to tackle, Jorrit.
People have really prepared tricky questions. It's impressive. Thank you very much, Ivo. I think this is a relevant question, and I think this touches upon, if we are talking about a broader framework, we really have to explain to compilers, to users, what we are talking about. And I think when we come up with a new SNA, we have to explain how to read the system of accounts and where the commonalities are. So elements of GFSM touch upon parts of the core of the SNA framework. There are links between the SNA and the SIA, and I think it would be very really beneficial if we can highlight that in the SNA, so that people understand the links between the various manuals, and that there is also coordination in that sense across the manuals where they touch upon similar issues, that it's also using the same terminology and ideally the same text. So in that sense, I don't think there is a common core across all 5, but I think it's like a Venn diagram, that there are certain overlaps, and that we have to make sure that we properly explain those overlaps, and that people properly understand the links between the manuals. Hopefully that addresses your question. But again, if it doesn't really address the question, please follow up with me bilaterally. Happy to further discuss. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, Bjorn. Well done. This certainly demonstrates that this is not a trivial exercise to try and put all of this together, and this is probably why we only do occasional updates of these standards, because it requires broad consultation, and there's many moving parts that we have to bring together. I think we'll have to move on to the second half of the program, but before we do so, before we leave the whole idea of this broadened framework, there's one question that I thought might come up in the chat, but it didn't, and since it didn't, I'd like to address it anyway. And it's one that we often get about countries with limited statistical capacity, and to what extent they might be able to adopt many of these broadened measures, which becomes quite a lot to expect. So if we look at the current system of national accounts now, many developing countries or countries of limited statistical capacity are unable to right now compile all the major elements of that system. And the extensions that we're proposing within the expanded guidance, for example, households unpaid work, the labor accounts, distributional measures, etc., on the well-being side are very relevant for the development path, but at the same time, it may be a lot to expect in terms of feasibility for countries to be able to onboard these immediately. So I think when we design this broader framework, we have to think that we need to design it so that it can be modular, so that where there is a particular policy interest in a country, if they can't take on all aspects of the framework, which, as Bjorn has pointed out, would be a lot to take on, it's a very large ask, they can pick and choose those that are very relevant within their context, and that extension can be developed in an integrated way within their own set of priorities for development of a statistical program. So with that, I'm going to move on to the second half of the program, which, as I mentioned before, is going to focus on particular aspects from a country perspective of some of the guidance that's being proposed within this broadened statistical framework for well-being and sustainability. And the first presenter in this is from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, Bjorn Jarvis, who's going to talk to us about labor counts. And Bjorn, again, I really want to thank you for joining us, what must be the early hours of the morning in Australia, to talk to us about the insights that have been gained on labor accounts. I know that labor accounts are also being developed, as Eric has mentioned, in the United States. In my background in Canada, we had something similar that was part of our labor productivity program. We didn't call them labor accounts, but they were sort of underpinning the national accounts and coherent with it. So we look forward to hearing your presentation, Bjorn. Please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Yeah, it's just past midnight here in Canberra, and just trying to share my screen. Okay. Can you see those slides, Catherine?
Yeah, that looks great, Bjorn. Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you all today. So good evening, good morning, good day to everyone. So my name is Bjorn Jarvis. I'm the head of the Labour Statistics program here at the ABS. And the presentation I've got for you today is structured around two elements. So given the labour accounts are still relatively new, there aren't too many countries that are actually that have a labour account, let alone are producing a labour account on a regular basis. I thought it might be useful just to give you a very quick run through of the Australian labour account, and then also where we're thinking about the potential opportunities to move more into the measuring wellbeing space. Okay, within the labour statistics program, so even though the labour account, you could flip a coin to see whether it's part of the labour statistics program or the national accounts program. So within Australia, it sits as one of what we've got on the slide here as 4 pillars of our labour statistics to provide insights into the Australian labour market. So like most countries have a long history of producing household surveys, the labour force survey, and surveys that are run in conjunction with the labour force survey, a broad range of establishment or business surveys, a large and expanding and still relatively new suite of administrative and big data on the labour market, including weekly job and wages indexes that we've been producing for the last couple of years, and then a labour account. And the labour account draws upon the combined strength that we have and the combined range of information that we have across those other 3 pillars. So quick chronology of the Australian labour account. So it was published as an experimental annual series for the first time in 2017. So it's coming up to close to 5 years since we first launched it. We moved to a quarterly series in 2018. We removed the experimental label in 2019, at which point it moved into a regular production process and was already being heavily used as a labour account. Last year, we undertook some major reviews of some of the source data and the methods as part of the major historical revisions, and the labour account historical revisions were done in parallel to the historical revisions process for the Australian national accounts, and that was the transition point for the national accounts to making use of the labour account. So we have labour account data that goes all the way back to the middle of the 1990s, and for the last 25 years, that really is the main source that we have for labour inputs into the national accounts. So the hours worked data from the labour account has replaced the labour force data as the input for hours worked, everything that stems from hours worked, and the full suite of productivity statistics that Australia produces. This is a really useful graph just to highlight some of the real impetus for why Australia jumped into producing a labour account relatively early. What we've got here is the ANZIC, so our Australian New Zealand Standard Industrial Classification, so looking at the 19 industry divisions that we have within our classification from A through to S, and you can see here the estimate of the number of employed people in each of those industries in the 14-15 financial year, and you can see the comparison between the business establishment survey estimates and what we had in our labour force survey. And there's a couple here that stand out. So if you look at Division N, so that's administrative and support services, which importantly includes a reasonably large population of people who are employed by labour hire companies, you can see quite a stark difference between the estimates from establishment sources and household sources like the labour force survey. And that really highlights the fact that with some of these more complex parts of the labour market, people don't necessarily know, beyond the working arrangements that they have, exactly what industry their employer is in, and understanding the kind of complex arrangements that some of those businesses have. And so this was a really good opportunity for us to actually look at how do we reconcile all of this information in order to produce the best set of labour market information that is strictly coherent with all of the other elements of the national accounts. So being able to use the labour account as a mechanism for getting all of the industry categorisation and a range of other elements of measuring the Australian labour market onto a much more coherent basis with the other elements of the national accounts in order to be able to produce better productivity measures. That was kind of first and foremost why we did the labour account as quickly as we did. So for anyone who was looking to understand productivity in the administrative and support services industry, so that division N, clearly there's a big difference if you're using the hours information that are derived based on that blue line as opposed to the red line. So you can see across the board, a lot of consistency across a range of those industries, but also Division N, Division F, Division A, Division L, yeah, a number where that is quite different. So what is the overarching design of the Australian labour account? So the time quadrant, so there's 4 quadrants. Time is the hours worked information, but we also produce internally consistent information across all 4 of those quadrants. So a total stock of jobs, a total stock of employed people, hours worked, and total labour payments, including compensation of employees and even broader measures of labour costs, all of it on a consistent industry basis, all reconciled and balanced between various input data sources and also internally coherent and consistent across these quadrants. So it provides a very powerful macro view of the labour market, drawing upon the rich range of information that we have across all of those other 3 pillars of our labour statistics program. So the value of the labour account, it complements the other information that we produce on the labour market. It also integrates by bringing together all of that information, balancing and reconciling all of that information. It produces headline estimates in employment, jobs, and the hours and payments, all on a quarterly basis at the division level, currently at the subdivision level, the second digit level of the industry classification. We do that on an annual basis, but we're progressing towards having that also on a quarterly basis. But importantly, that 4th point there about the value of the hours information that we get from that. We also use that, use the labour account as our main vehicle for exploring multiple job holding, the relative distribution of jobs across main jobs as well as secondary jobs, so jobs that are worked concurrently either as a person's 2nd, 3rd, 4th or so on job, and also looking at estimates of labour market activity outside of the scope of the labour force survey. And you know, for those labour force survey aficionados out there, you know, the scope of the labour force survey, like so many labour force surveys around the world, looks at a usually resident civilian population, age 15 years and over in the case of Australia. And so the Australian labour account can also factor in the contribution that people who are not usual residents, who are short-term temporary residents, the contribution of Defence Force personnel, as well as the contribution of people under the age of 15. So it brings all those groups together. During the COVID period, us having a labour account has been an absolute godsend because with closed borders, this has been one of the main sources of information for us to actually provide an estimate of the overall contribution of the population who hasn't been able to move into the Australian labour market. So their contribution of the jobs that are worked, the number of people that will be working those jobs, but importantly, the hours that that particular population would normally be working within the Australian labour market, and also what their total share of labour payments would be. Like many countries, there's no single easy data source to be able to quantify that through surveys or even a single administrative data set. So the labour account becomes a really powerful framework for being able to produce model-based estimates using all of the pieces of information that we have, all those incomplete pieces of information which together provide quite powerful underpinnings of models. So some of the limitations of the Australian labour account at the moment, it's just a national focused part of our program. We're currently prototyping some work to get down to the state and territory level. We're also looking to, in time, get down to producing regional level information. We're currently focusing just on the total population, so we haven't broken it down by core demographics and a lot of that rich information that Eric was talking about that exists within the survey statistics domains. as well as the administrative data sources, but that's definitely where we're looking to extend, particularly starting with having being able to break down men and women as an initial way of disaggregating the labour account, as well as being able to disaggregate into age groups. We've done some exploratory work around having status and employment to be able to compare the contribution that employees and non-employees and what their aggregate outcomes are over time. And then the last thing that we've got there is at the moment, so labour accountants, like most national accountants and people that work in satellite accounts, are scavengers of data. And so we're constantly on the lookout for new sources of data to be able to move from heavily model-based, assumption-based approaches to things that are more data-driven. So that's definitely something that we're conscious will be a useful optimization in the future. So some of the future directions, being able to make greater use of administrative data within the labour account, as we mentioned, subnational information, and also expanding into more of the sectoral view across the public and private sectors. So I mentioned before the scope being broader than what we measure typically in a labour force survey. So the scope of the Australian labour account is designed to align with the scope of the Australian national accounts. But we're also looking at the potential to be able to move beyond the traditional boundary and the traditional focus of the national accounts through the labour account to be able to pick up some of these key areas around unpaid household work, volunteer work, potentially looking at some of those unreported kind of illegal activities, but also moving into some of those domains that were talked about at the start of the session around education, training, study, and some human capital related work. But also you can see a couple of other examples that are well and truly outside of the scope of what macroeconomists and national accountants would normally be focused on. So the potential to move into unpaid housework and volunteering, we're in the process of running time use surveys and reinstating time use surveys in Australia. So looking at where we can get more hours-based inputs. So we've got a number of surveys beyond time use surveys that can provide some insights into this, but we're definitely looking at how we can leverage time use survey data within our models. And also looking at some of those long-standing measurement and conceptual challenges in this space around how you value unpaid work, quantifying the hours of care provided, whether it's caring for children, caring for the elderly, caring for people with a disability. So there's previously been work done in Australia within the National Accounts Program, and we're definitely looking to leverage that in any expanded scope that we take to the Australian labour account. Beyond that, an example of some of the other areas that you could potentially expand out, looking at the labour account, so measuring the extent, volume and share of all the hours not worked. So Australia's had a long track record of measuring underemployment. So the ILO underemployed population of particular interest, but we've also produced a range of expanded and extended measures. The labour account provides the ability to actually take an even more expansive view, looking across all of those pieces of information, particularly being able to move beyond the traditional scope that a lot of labour statistics have tended to focus on, and in particular being able to produce a range of new per capita measures of underutilisation and share-based measures of underutilisation. And we've also noted here human capital, and that being a particular area of interest and focus in Australia. And as you can see at the bottom there, and so much more. So I wanted to give you a bit of a flavour. We are still very much at the start of our journey on the labour account, so we see enormous potential, but this at least gives you a bit of a sense of the journey that we've been on and also where we think we may be headed. So thank you, and back to you, Catherine.
Thank you so much, Bjorn. I think if I had to give a presentation after midnight, I wouldn't be nearly as clear and informative and articulate as you've been in describing the Australian BABS efforts on labour accounts. Some of you may be aware that Michael Smeeds from the ABS actually headed up our area group under the task team on wellbeing and sustainability on labor, education, and human capital. So we really had the benefit in the development of the guidance from the Australian experience in developing these labor accounts. And so far in the consultations, this extension of the SNA has been very well received. As again, I mentioned, in Canada, I had some experience with developing a similar set of estimates, although not to the same kind of degree as what's been done in Australia in association with our labor productivity program. And they really underpinned not just analytical extensions of the national accounts, but in terms of data quality and coherence within the program itself. And they also had a great deal of benefit for the development of satellite accounts. So whenever we were developing a satellite account on a particular issue, for example, clean technology, digital economy, we had a set of labor statistics that could be used for employment, hours worked, et cetera, that could be linked. So it had a great deal of measurement potential as well. In addition to the areas that you already mentioned, which segues really well into the next presentation by Francisco on households' unpaid work. So not to drag things out any further, Francisco, I'm going to give you the floor, and we look forward to hearing about efforts in Mexico on unpaid household work. So please go ahead. And as I mentioned before, we'll take the 3 presentations, and then we'll have whatever time left. We'll have some time for questions from the floor. So Francisco.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Catherine. Do you see my slides?
I do, but they're not in presentation view yet. There you go. That's perfect, Francisco. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, first, I would like to give some specific context in relation with this work. Of course, well, my name is Francisco Guillén, and I'm Deputy Director General National Accounts. And as part of the context that I would like to say is that in the case of the National Institutes of Statistics and Geography, we have both main views. One is in relation to the coordination of the national system of information and statistical statistical and geographical information, and the other one means to produce the information that needs the different users according with the most important information that we have to look in a very close interaction and coordination with the private, public institutions, and of course with the users. And one point is here is very important to have a very close communication with them. And on the other hand, the capabilities, the statistical capabilities means to have a very dynamic and flexible change according with these needs. And of course, in the case of the national accounts, we look for or to evolve through around 7 satellite accounts to generate information to help and to look the well-being and sustainable development. And this gives us a very good views according with the Mexican needs, specifically to extend the views of the national accounts to have a more flexible response according with the needs of the users. And in the case of Mexico, these seven satellite accounts go beyond this idea about what means well-being. We have 7. One is in relation with the health satellite accounts. The other is in relation with dwellings and the culture activities. The tourism is another. The non-profit institutional satellite accounts is another very big challenge to look what happened with the benefits or the reaction about the society in terms of how the proper Mexican society becomes use the possibilities to get benefits, social benefits. On the other hand, and the last one is in relation with the new experience that we has almost last year, some specific reporting in relation with the ecosystems accounts. With this, of course, the most important thing that we would like to look in relation with the unpaid household work is to have some information about the impact, the economic impact of the unpaid household works. Yeah, and that gives us the opportunity to have another public and another view about what happened with the households in the case of the productive services that provides this account. And of course, this is not part of the production frontier on the national accounts. What is the unpaid household works? Well, we look time spent on domestic and care work, and we carry it out by the household members to produce services for their own consumption. This means that we have to look many statistical granular data to look the work done without getting paid or remuneration. And in this case, one of the most important and concept is that the activity that any activity is considered productive in this satellite account if you could delegate to the third person and it provides and of course if this provides a product or service that can be exchanged. What activities are considered in the satellite accounts? Well, one of these are the feeding, other is the help to other households and volunteer works. Other is in relation with health, and that means the care and support on the households. The other is the house cleaning and maintenance, and the other one is the laundry and food worker, and of course the management of shopping and the use of incomes in relation with the needs that has the households. But we have to exclude the personal activities that usually cannot be delegated. In them, the benefit is only received by the persons who carry out the activity. And of course, we have to look only the time spent on the main activity to value it. And of course, we have to exclude the secondary or simultaneous activities. To do this, we need to look when we began this project, not only the system of national accounts framework, we have to look the proposal for a satellite accounts of household production of Eurostat. And we have again to look some specific resolutions coming from the International Labour Organization. And we always try to look the most important practices in the world. And we have to look at this experience like the case of Australia, Canada, and Finland, and others, of course. And with this framework, we have to look the possibilities about how can we value and update annual unpaid hours. And of course, we use the national as a sources the National Survey on Time Use that we did every 2 years, and on the other hand, we have to consolidate some specific information coming from our own system of national accounts, the Mexican system of national accounts, in relation with goods and services, to get some information about the average remuneration by economic activity. And on the other hand, with the National Survey of Occupation and Employment, we update annual hours unpaid and costs per hour by type of activity. With this information, we could get annual data, and if I remember well, we have a very large series coming from 2003 until now, and that gives us the possibility for the users to get some research, and of course, to taking some specific policies in relation with the households. On the other hand, we use the replacement cost, and in the case of Mexico, we have combined the generalist and the equivalent individual function, and we produce the values in the hybrid. That means that we have to combine the general replacement cost with the equivalent individual function replacement cost. Of course, we have to look not only the gross figures, we have to look the net figures, and in this case, the difference is in relation with the social security combination that in the case of the gross figures, we include that, and for the net figures, we have to rest. And in this, if we look the contribution from the gross figures, we know that the value of unpaid domestic and care work is equal to around 27.6% of the gross domestic product. And one other thing is in relation with the gender views, and in the case of the gender views, if we are looking for the net figures, each woman worked the equivalent of 69,128 pesos per year, and the man 27,175 pesos per year, and that means a very big difference in relation with the gender views. This is with this slide, you could see how increase, and of course in 2020, as you remember, we have a global pandemic, and that gives that the households in these results needs to have a very own services inside to the households. On the other hand, well, it's important to have economic value and to compare some economic activities in the country. And this, in the case of the value, we know that the equivalent in million pesos go up around 438,035 millions of pesos, and the percentage in each or this percentage means, in the case of the commerce, about the or we could compare with the commerce, and this is this economic value of the unpaid households means more than, for example, the commerce activity or the manufacturing industries or the construction or the transport, mail, and storage. The economic value of unpaid households work gives us a gender view in the different activities that we produce in this work, and this you could see that in almost all these activities, the woman has the more value and the more contribution for the households, and probably the shopping and household management means some equilibrium between women and men, but that means to give another view about the efforts of some specific policies in relation with gender. In the case of the per capita value according to the kinships, of course, we have again a difference between women's and men's, and of course, this gives us another possibility to get information, and we have to complement this with non-monetary indicators according with the time use that we get from the survey, and of course with the other survey that I told before, that I said before, in relation with the employment, occupation, and of course another thing is that is very important is in relation with health. In this case, we note the effort that the healthcare inside of the households for chronically ill means that woman has more effort, specifically for those current chronic illness. No, of course the use of these unpaid households work in the view of the satellite accounts provides information for public policies and decision making on issues related to gender equality, and of course how these give the view about the household consumption and spending, the child care, the care of the elderly, and of course the sick. I would like to say only here that we have some specific programs in relation with the national care system, and in Spanish the equity of the igual, we call this pro igualdad, and of course in the case of the Supreme Court, the right to compensatory harmony in light of the right to non-discrimination and the right of access to a decent standard. And that gives us some idea about what means the public policy and the use of this instrument in Mexico. Of course, Mexico in this view participate in the preparation of the guide on valuing unpaid household services work of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. And one other thing that I would like to say here, because we are very active, or we try to share our experience, and right now we are pending to advise Kenya in June 2022, and of course Mexico support countries in Latin America and other regions. For this, we have to look, or we have the opportunity to have in our websites all our results in a more granular possibilities to our users, and we have a specific simulator to have a very good communication with the users, especially with the households, and they could use this simulator to know what happened in your house, in one specific house, I mean. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Francisco, for this very insightful presentation. I'm always impressed by the extent to which Mexico has been venturing into a lot of these areas in terms of satellite accounts, and unpaid household work is a very important example. You know, we've had studies of households unpaid work for many, many years. At the risk of dating myself, I worked on an update for households unpaid work in Canada in the 1990s. At that time, we were really trying to understand market trade-offs in work with increasing labor force participation of women. And now I'm fascinated to see Francisco's analysis where he's got the year 2020. He's got an annual time series, but it also shows the year 2020 for Mexico, which of course was the onset of the global pandemic. So now we have a whole other sort of set of policy applications, understanding sort of what are the demands in terms of you know, households unpaid work when we have schools that are shut down, when we have increasing layoffs and things like that, and what does that mean within that context. So it's very fascinating to see. I don't think these questions will ever go away, and it's very interesting to see that this activity, activity which was formerly measured in satellite accounts, will now be mainstreamed in national accounts broadened measures for the SNA in particular, because I think it will always be a very important policy question. Okay, we have one final presentation by my dear colleague, Jose Pablo Valdez Martinez from the World Bank, before we can take questions from the floor, so hopefully we'll have a little bit of time. Jose is going to talk about distributional measures for Costa Rica from some collaborative work that he did via our assistance program at the World Bank with the National Accounts compilers in Costa Rica. So Jose, you have the final word today, so please take the floor.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for your kind words. It's a pleasure and an honor for me to be presenting here. So in this presentation, I will give you an overview of the work that our colleagues from the Central Bank of Costa Rica and the National Statistics Institute of Costa Rica made as an initial effort to compile distributional measures of income, consumption, and saving of the household sector in national accounts, as part of a World Bank project financed by the Trust Fund for Statistical Capacity Building. So in this regard, I would like to highlight that the merit is theirs for our colleagues from the Costa Rican Central Bank and such office. This was a remarkable and very successful effort. And also, let me, Catherine, thank you for your support as well. And special thanks to Jarvis, because I had the feeling that we bothered you too many times with this. So thank you, Jarvis, again for your support as well. So okay, yeah. So you can see here the outline of the presentation. I will briefly introduce this work and go over the methodology followed, the main data sources used, the main results obtained, and also I will talk about the challenges, lessons learned, and next steps. So as an introduction, I would like to say that one can expect that in situations in which inequality grows, there will be more intense economic crisis, and the response to this crisis might not be as successful as it should, in the sense that one might design and implement economic policies that, even serving to increase the level of GDP, may increase also the level of inequality from a macro viewpoint. And this happens if there are no tools to carry out this type of distributional analysis from a macro perspective. Therefore, a framework to do this work is needed. And you know that this idea is not new. We all remember the 2009 Stiglitz and Peterson report. We know for example, the work did by Piketty as well, and even the World Bank Poverty Commission back in 2017. All this concludes that it is critical to have tools to measure distributional GDP figures consistent with official GDP data, but using information, distributional information contained in micro statistics. And So as for this particular project, there were a number of project development objectives. We wanted to develop distributional measures of national accounts through a simplified methodology. In doing so, we wanted to better understand the differences between national accounts and micro statistics, to help reconcile those data sets. Finally, we would like to improve the quality of both national accounts and micro statistics. So there have been a number of initiatives to derive the distribution of national accounts, but perhaps the most, I would say, the most relevant one has been the expert group on disparities in national accounts framework led by our colleague Jarvis present here for its methodological strength and its consistency with the system of national accounts, the SNA, and also due to the amount of data generated in the over the years it has been working and the wide number of participant countries in the project. So that's why we decided to adopt the EGDNA methodology to do this distribution analysis. The different stages are listed here. I wouldn't like to spend too much time describing them. I would like just to say that we started with a preliminary assessment of the household survey and the national accounts data of Costa Rica to see if the study was actually feasible. And after this assessment was completed, we just moved on to the different stages of the EGDNA methodology, which are the adjustment of the national accounts totals and linking micro and macro statistics, meaning that we have to determine the relevant variables from household surveys in relation to the national accounts variables. And next step will be the data imputation and scaling the household survey data to the national accounts totals. Then households were clustered into by equivalence adjusted disposable income quintile, but also by gender of the reference person of the household and by the economic activity of the reference person of the household. Now, regarding of the project outputs, I mean, a detailed worldwide report was completed, including the results of this exercise, but also important outcomes were achieved. I would like to highlight that, of course, Costa Rica increased its capacity to compile distribution national accounts, and the World Bank, as an institution, we did increase our capacity to assist our client countries in deriving this kind of measures. As for the data sources used, apart from, of course, from the institutional sector accounts from Costa Rica, we use the National Survey of Household Income and Expenditure, which is conducted every 5 years, still for the main data source, and but also the National Survey of Households and Micro Enterprises, conducted on an annual basis. If I would like to move over to the main results now. So we obtained preliminary results up to household saving for year 2017. Now we will discuss this later, but please note that the reference year for the income and expenditure survey was 2018, and not the same year as for the institutional sector accounts available at the time of the study. This was one of the challenges we had to face to complete the study. And as for the household groups, like I mentioned before, it included the income quintiles, but also reference persons gender and reference persons economic activity, household per group into this cluster using this classification. And we derived the usual inequality indicators, mainly the different income and consumption variables by household and by consumption unit, and the disparity measures listed in on this slide. We will see the results, a number of graphs later on. So moving on to the results obtained, I would like to start with sharing this slide that shows the results by income quintile. It shows the ratio of the average adjusted disposable income for each quintile in this case, compared to the average for the household sector of the country as a whole. And also we compare the results for Costa Rica with the results of the second exercise of the EGDNA kindly provided by our colleague Jarvis. We see that Costa Rica behaves in a similar way to Mexico in this graph, and also in the main income components, which we are showing just 4 of them on this slide right now. Moving on to, well, this is actually a very interesting, this is why it's very interesting, this type of analysis, because it allows us to measure the distributional impact of economic policies. You will know that national accounts provide a way to measure income redistribution, in particular in the household accounts. We're talking about including the taxes and social contributions to the households and the social transfers they receive. So this is actually shown in the transition from the balance of primary incomes to the adjusted disposable income, or in the difference between these variables. So in any case, we see that the impact of net current transfers was negative for the top quintile, which makes sense, right? And it's higher for the other quintiles. And now similar results can be obtained for the final consumption expenditure of households and for its components. It's very, very similar results once more. Let me show here some components of consumption. But we did this analysis for more components. And we can also measure how social transfers in kind reduce the level of inequality by looking at the differences in the ratios of the fifth to the first quintile of actual final consumption and final consumption expenditure. So in all countries, not just in Costa Rica, but also in countries of the EDNA, we saw that this ratio is lower for actual final consumption expenditure than for final consumption expenditure. And this is a very interesting slide as well concerning the saving ratio, the saving as percentage of the adjusted disposable income, which is in our case in Costa Rica was negative for all income quintals except for the fifth one, which makes us think that of course the households for which this saving ratio is negative are more vulnerable, but also we can think that there might be a significant amount of income that perhaps is related to the non-observed economy that is missing due to lack of coverage in the supply side national accounts, but not from the demand side. So a similar analysis was conducted clustering the households in terms of the gender of the reference persons, like I mentioned before. So households were clustered in those in which the reference person was male, female, or in which the leadership of the household was shared. And the results are here summarized in these 4 graphs. Once again, we can take a look at the ratios to the average for the different household groups. It looks like households with shared leadership rank higher in terms of adjusted disposable income, because the ratio to the average is the highest, while in terms of actual final consumption, looks like the households in which male is reported as the reference person rank higher. Once again, the negative saving ratio might indicate that female-led households are more vulnerable. So finally, moving over to the main results by economic activity of the reference person of the household. Here's a list of the 20 economic activities considered for the study, and just a quick snapshot of some results obtained in terms of the rate of the average of the adjusted disposable income. We saw the highest ratio belongs to the professional, scientific, and technical activities, and the lowest to agriculture. And in terms of after final consumption, real estate activities rank higher. Agriculture is the lowest one. Now, regarding the challenges, the lessons learned, and then the next steps. So it is true that the household income and expenditure survey and the national accounts did not refer to the same year. And this is a difficulty, of course. The reference year for the accounts was 2017, the latest available year at the time of the study. Of course, we could always have used the 2013 data to do this study and have the same reference year for both the data sources, but still we thought it was more relevant to use the 2017 data national accounts and 2018 data for the household survey. And the thing is that the framework that was compiled easy to update once the results of 2018 were available for national accounts. Now, there were some additional difficulties that are related to the fact that this is actually an experimental pilot study, right? We did try to avoid the use of the structure of the aggregates to distribute the components, right? And rather we try to favor the use of a linear combination of several variables, because we saw that this was reducing the macro gaps and actually was showing more plausible results. Of course, there was some adjustments that we had to make to both the national accounts and survey data, once again related to the experimental character of this work. And I would like to highlight that the working file structure that was developed will facilitate the compilation of this kind of analysis in the future. And also in this regard, the collaboration between the NSI and the central bank was critical. Once again, my thanks to them, because there was remarkable the effort they made. And just to conclude, I would like to say that we conducted a regional seminar as a closing event of this project on December 1 to 3, 2020. And there were participants from 7 Central American countries, and also from Bolivia and the OECD, IMF, UNSC, and World Bank were present in this seminar. And the main takeaway from the workshop was there was I guess a desire from the participant countries to replicate this exercise at regional level, and hopefully this will happen soon. And finally, this is also a very valid experience in terms of the testing strategy for the SNA update regarding distributions. So I think I didn't forget anything. So thank you so much for your attention, and over to you, Catherine. Thanks.
Thank you so much, JP, which we affectionately call Jose on our team at the World Bank. A couple of things to emphasize quickly from Jose's presentation is, first of all, I guess it's perhaps obvious to some, but not all, that the benefit of having these distributional measures coherent with national accounts. I mean, distributional measures are often available from other sources, which are, perhaps disparate and, only available for partial years, et cetera, is that, we can marry them with the actual growth. So it comes back to Eric's presentation this morning when we look at how can we decompose within the measurement framework of the system of national accounts these estimates into distributional categories, whether they be quintiles or particular income groups and things like that. So Jose, for example, showed how the national account saving rate could break down. And it showed that all the saving was basically happening in the highest quintile. And this is a finding that's quite consistent across many, many different countries. We've had the benefit of the expert group on disparities in national accounts, which has been active for quite a few years now under Jorit's leadership, to inspire the guidance in SNA on this particular issue. And it's considered a priority area in well-being and sustainability. And I think that Jose's work with Costa Rica has shown that the method can be simplified so that it can be generalized to countries with limited statistical capacity. Maybe Costa Rica doesn't have the most limited statistical capacity, but the work in developing a simplified framework that can be generalized to different types of arrangements is very promising, and shows that this work is very relevant across many, many different areas. So we have just a few minutes left for questions from the floor, and I see a couple of folks have already put some things in the chat. So I'm going to go back to, we had a kind of a little bit of a disparate presentation in the last, we covered a lot of ground, I guess, in the last session, because we had the labor counts, which I think we discussed fairly exhaustively, and then that segued into households unpaid work, and then again, a bit more on distributional analysis. So there were a couple questions that came in on the households unpaid work side. So going back to a question from Peter Van de Ven, Francisco, for you. To collect data on time use, are you looking at the potential use of new digital technologies? And you can read the chat yourself, but I'll just mention that one of the participants pointed out that there is another side event that's going to cover, in particular, the time use measurement side of things. So you can be encouraged to take a look at that as well. So Francisco, over to you for Peter's question.
Thank you very much for these questions, Peter. Thank you, Catherine. Well, of course, as I told you before, we have to look every 2 years the use time surveys, and that means that we have to look the questionnaire to improve some specific data, and we are not looking now yet. We are looking. We know something about the digital time use, but in other sources. Of course, we have to study which kind of questions we could look inside. The other service is in relation with the TICS, the technological information and communication survey that we did with other institutions, and we get there some specific data in relation with the digital time use in the households. So we have to link other surveys with the time use survey to know a little bit more or more granular data. This is our way for look what happened with the unpaid households works in the next steps. Thank you.
Thanks, Francisco. And I'd encourage you to take a look at the chat, because there's a couple of very relevant links, again, from Francisco Grum to the side event on the time use survey, and also to the standards on the valuation of households' unpaid work. Let me see, the guide on valuing unpaid household service work. And there is an additional question. I guess I could put this question, if Eric is still here, to Eric, and perhaps also to Yorick, because he's an expert in the EGDNA work. And the question is, how is this methodology different from the SAM methodology, which features disaggregation of the household sector? So maybe Yorick, if you're still there, you could address that question, and then I'll also give Jose Pablo a chance to respond.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and thank you very much, Jose Pablo, for the excellent presentation. When looking at the sum, I'm not really an expert in that field, so I'm not sure how in the past they were approaching this in compiling their sum. But I think the main issue is that the countries have to bring in as much information as possible, and to see if they can use a lot of the microdata sources to link to the macroeconomic aggregates to arrive at the relevant breakdown. So I think looking at the SAM methodology, I think they are probably approaching it from a similar perspective in the sense that you need to have the microdata sources. But I'm not an expert in the SAM, so I don't know the specific methodology applied there. So cannot really be of much help in this in that sense.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in SAM either, but my understanding is that the SAM is a very flexible approach, where you can sort of, when it was spelled out in the prior SNA guidelines, it's really, being able to break down anything in any way, comparable to SNA, whereas this new guidance is very specific to these breakdowns for the household sector and proposes methodologies where you can actually, in practical terms, marry the micro sources with the macro sources by making particular adjustments, and really spells out the method for being able to do that within a set of standards, which were first developed through the expert group on disparities in national accounts, and now are being refined and made part of this broader framework on well-being and sustainability within the SNA proper. So, but maybe I'll let Eric respond to that point, and then I'll turn it over to Jose Pablo, and then I think we may have to close. So Eric, please.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So I think what I'll do here is just focus on the point that Catherine, you and Bjorn both made about the marriage between the macro and the micro data, and how crucial this is for making a difference on the beyond GDP agenda, whether it be distributional accounts, whether it be healthcare type accounts, looking at spending by medical conditions or other types of outcomes. This world we're in now, where we're trying to complement our macro statistics with these beyond GDP statistics, requires this work to leverage the data in a way that can fit within our core frameworks. And so that's what we've been focused on very much at BEA, is how we can do that. A limiting factor sometimes can be the types of information that's available within the system. For example, household data is not as frequent in its availability as is some of our other core data sets. And so that's something as a system we will have to think about as we move forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. And Peter has pointed out in the chat that the purpose and methodology, the expert group on disparities in national accounts and the SAM are not all that different. So, Jose Pablo, would you like to react to any of these comments on methodology and SAM versus EGDNA?
Thank you, Catherine. I mean, I think I don't have much to add apart from what has already been said. I do believe that just like Peter mentioned in the chat, that the methodologies are not that different, and of course the focus is more on the household sector. That's obvious, right? And I guess the sum, the level of the breakdown of income and consumption elements is lower, but yeah, not much to add on my end, Catherine.
All right, thank you very much. We're just running a couple of minutes over, so I just wanted to point you to some of the links that were provided by Bjorn in the chat. If you want to know more about the work of the expert group on disparities in national accounts, there's a link to the work and to the latest data that have been compiled across countries that are participating in that initiative. And with that, I regret that I would love to talk to this about all this stuff for another hour, but I regret that I will have to close this session. But I would like to really thank all of the presenters. I think that we've had a really excellent sampling of the various guidance that's available within the task team on well-being and sustainability, both in terms of the sort of a broad overview of the approach that's being taken to broadening SNA measures, in addition to some specific topics under the well-being stream. We didn't have time today to address the sustainability stream, but there's the sustainability piece, or the environmental piece, if you want, of that work, which is also very significant and is about aligning the system of national accounts to the system of environmental and economic accounts and expanding these measures in relevant ways. In some cases, they have impacts, the proposals have impacts on both standards. So again, as much as I'd like to keep talking about this, I want to thank everyone and encourage you again to take a look. There is a link in Bjorn's presentation to the site for global consultations on all of the guidance that we're developing. So you can have a look at the specific guidance notes themselves and really get into the meat there more in depth than the little sampling that we're able to provide in this 2-hour session today. But again, thanks to our presenters and thanks to all of you who participated in this session. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Catherine.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Bye.